Hey, I'm Lee Kasumba, and this is our journey across Africa, navigating the intricate landscapes of business, culture, and global influence from the African perspective.
The Africa Whisperer, telling authentic African stories in a global way.
On this episode of The Africa Whisperer.
In high school, there's always assembly time. So during assembly, there was this grand piano, this grand Yamaha piano, and then the music teacher would always be playing this piano. So just because I resonated so strongly with music, I would always just be fixated on her and what she's doing on the piano. And this one time, I just went past the music department. I just wanted to just touch the piano, right? I mean, it was this is the piano I wanted to touch actually, which was at a smaller scale. And the teacher at the time, I remember responding to me very harshly and then just saying to me that I cannot touch the piano because I cannot afford it. And I just remember how those words really stuck with me, and it made me so aware the divide really, and how I was really on the lower side of I would say the food chain, because she was right. I could not afford the piano, but remembering how that made me feel curated this sort of like trauma. And for the longest time, I did not want to play that instrument. But it is also something that fueled me into not wanting another black child to feel as though they cannot play an instrument, they cannot access music because of where they come from.
My guest on this episode of The Africa Whisperer has what can only be described as audacious faith. She's been knocked down but keeps getting up again, and each time she rises higher. When she was told that she couldn't touch the piano at school because she wasn't able to afford one, she started playing the trumpet at the Salvation Army. When she put on a classical music event that included an orchestra, choir, sourcing rehearsal space, paying for expensive venue, and pulling off the show, only to have the headline sponsor go back on their word after the show, leaving her with an insurmountable amount of debt, she got up again. When she lost her mom, who was her great support, in an untimely way, she cried, but got up again. Today, Ofentse Pitse is a shining light in the classical music world. She owns an orchestra, is a conductor. She's bringing classical music to a whole new demographic and is courageously working to bring African instruments into the orchestra. And she's only getting started. Ofentse Pitse, it is so awesome to be able to have this conversation with you on the Africa Whisperer for multiple reasons. First of all, you are the person who designed the Africa Whisperer logos. So I'm really happy. I think that it's kind of full circle that you're here. And second of all, I had the pleasure of meeting you, I believe, in like 2019. And I remember from that first time that I met you, I was really just so amazed at your vision, your plan, and your passion. You were so relentless and fearless, even though you were going through one of the hardest times in your life. And now just watching you grow and seeing all of the awesome barriers that you're breaking and ceilings that you're shooting through, I'm just really privileged to have you on this episode of the Africa Whisperer. Welcome.
Hey, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. And what an introduction, right? And it's also an honor for me to be here, because I've seen how the show has grown, and for me it has just been such a blessing to see that in whichever capacity, whether creatively or because I just really believed in you. I see it blossoming into what it is now, so it's also really a full circle moment for me as well.
With regards to this podcast, we really love to give people insights about and talk to people that are doing incredible things in the continent, in the African continent. We need to be able to celebrate our stories, and I feel that when it comes to the business sector, to entrepreneurship specifically, to tech, to the creative industry, all of that, people like you are really reshaping global views about Africa in such incredible ways. But I want to track back to the beginning of your life, for people who might not be aware of your story, because I think it's just a story of destiny, really. You were born in 1992, and to put this into context, for people who might not be aware of South Africa's history, that was a year after former President Nelson Mandela, may he rest in peace, was released from prison. And it was just before the 1994 elections, which would have been South Africa's official first democratic elections, where Black South Africans were able to vote, and people of color in South Africa in general. So you being born at that time, I think that you form part of the Born Freeze. Am I correct? I'm just trying to remember.
Well, I'm like only 2 years shy of that, but because the Born Freeze actually were born in 1994, but I guess I'm still on a similar band or wagon, right? Because 1992, we were preempting this great freedom that was sort of like making its way to South Africa as really well deserved, right? So I was born in 1992 in Pretoria, and interesting time because I was also born in a family of creatives, but also academics. So during that time, my grandfather and my grandmother were very stern about education, right? So, and church. So it was really just education and God, nothing else, nothing in between. And my mom being very forward thinking in her ways, so it fit to raise me to be an individual, right? So I was never told by my mom that I should be this or should be that. For me, it was just important to tell her which school I wanted to go to and what I wanted to be. Speaking again on the whole idea of freedom, for me, before I knew about the democratic freedom, I think I was really given the space and the upbringing that allowed me to be completely free, even before knowing what freedom really was.
And you mentioned your grandfather, and I'm so glad because I wanted to bring that into the conversation. If I remember correctly, your grandfather passed away when you were 18 months old, but he was actually making music. He was creating music. He was a conductor or something along those lines. And so it's really as though he passed the baton on to you. From what you've heard from the elders in the family, from his siblings and so forth, what stories have you heard about what he had done? I think also, especially because when we think about the creative industry, like the theater, the arts, music, and so forth, that really played such a huge role in helping South Africa get into its place of freedom, as we saw with people like John Carney and so forth. So with your grandfather, can you talk to us about what you know about his career and what it was that he was doing?
Yeah. So my grandfather was a formidable force in the jazz space. So he was a trumpeter for a jazz band called the Jazz Maniacs. So the Jazz Maniacs were, in their prime, really instrumental part of the jazz space in Sophia Town, Kofifi and stuff. So he was close friends with the likes of your Huma Sikelas, your Abdullah Abrahams, and really the big guys really in the jazz space. So from what I hear, he also wrote and arranged the music that they played in this band. So in a way, my gift really came from, I would say, my granddad, right? Because I didn't get the opportunity to really grow under his wing because he passed away when I was 18 months old. So I hear that he was very instrumental in the creative liberation really of South Africa, because at the time, all we had was art. So even from the fashion to the music, we were very deliberate about who we are in spite or despite the economic challenges or the inequalities that were happening around us. So I would say that my grandfather was really, I believe, relentless also and resilient, especially at that time, and to be a lead trumpeter and of this band that I speak of. And he also had a spinal cord condition where he had like an arching back. So like his brothers and his cousins and all of the other boys in the family were leaning more towards the manly stuff, like going into the mines or fixing stuff. He was given the opportunity to choose music and education. So which was, I believe, a great choice, because had it not been for that, the story would not be written.
Whew, I love that. That's such power. I mean, it must be such a weight that you know that you carry, and a responsibility to know that you are literally standing on the backs of your ancestors. We hear that term all the time, but you quite literally, and it's also really clear that it's in your DNA, it's in your blood. Your grandfather's blood clearly runs so strongly through you. So that's really awesome. And now moving the story a little forward, the first time, if I understand that you thought that, okay, you wanted to go into the classical kind of music side. Was this with the Salvation Army Band? Can you talk to us about that, how that all happened and what their role was in the community in general where you grew up?
The Salvation Army was the heart and the core really of our religious life in my family. So my grandfather is the one who actually introduced the entire family to the Salvation Army, because before that we were Presbyterian and Methodist, I believe. So due to the musical involvement and I would say the richness in music of the Salvation Army, my granddad was like, okay, this is the church that we're actually going to be a part of, right? And then so I started playing the trumpet from the age of 12. And again, the Salvation Army, being the Salvation Army, came with the whole idea of giving back. So the instruments even that we were playing at the time were instruments that were donated to the church. So because of that, it fostered this space to allow us to learn at no cost. So at 12, I was a young girl looking at this militant, very stoic brass band playing each and every Sunday. And I was like, hang on, why have I not seen a girl like myself playing in the band? And again, being as overly ambitious as ever, I was like, actually, I want to be a part of that. So the minister at the time announced that, on Tuesday, I'll be having rehearsals for each and every person. Whoever wants to learn how to play, they must come Tuesday in the afternoon, and then I'll teach them how to play. So Major Shadrach Njanga gave me the trumpet and was like, okay, I'm going to teach you the C scale. So we started playing the C scale with all of the 3 valves, and he taught me not only how to play, but how to position myself. So the sitting, how you sit, how you place your chest, how you place your hands is very important with this instrument, right? And then from there, I just had this undying love for music, because now I was growing an understanding of all of these notes and what is happening. So it really opened my eyes to the possibility of what can happen. But I did not get the dream of being a conductor from there. It was just me being part of church and doing churchly stuff, which is really rooted in giving back.
I find it interesting but not surprising that you're playing the trumpet, because you're like, why are there no other women doing this? I don't understand. But to know Ofentse is to know that is exactly your DNA. You always like question. You're kind of like,
exactly,
why would this happen? So now you're playing in the Salvation Army. You're playing the trumpet. You're obviously learning so much in terms of discipline. What would you say that you learned while playing with the Salvation Army Band from life lesson perspectives that has really helped shape who you are in terms of a person and in terms of your work ethic?
The first thing that I can think of is character, right? So there's a certain character that you have to have, because again, like I was saying, you are given this instrument, right, that is not really yours. So what you always need to make sure is that the next person who's going to use this, they have to find it in a better condition than you left it, right? So that was always the first thing, that yes, you are given the instrument and the space and all that to use the instrument, but you need to make sure that you take care of it. So there was a responsibility head on, like from the get-go, that you are responsible. So this is your instrument and you're responsible for it, right? And then the second thing was time. So it was very important for you to keep time, because you had a limited time given to you when it comes to the instrument. So if you are using it on Saturday and then someone else is using it on Sunday, you need to make sure that the time you have to use this instrument on Saturday, you use it very, very wisely, right? Another thing that I learned was the ministry, right? So the slogan of the Salvation Army is saved to serve. So you learning how to play this instrument, you given these skills, these life skills that are rooted in music, is so that you can impact the next person. So if you don't really impact the next person, it's almost like there's really no point in the Salvation Army playing the active role that they are tasked to play, actually, right? So I also learned the importance of being ready for whatever. So I mean, Salvation Army, we were always ready to march. So we had these marches where we'd go out in the community and then recruit people. So speak about God, speak about Christianity, and then if even if it's 20 people that we're talking to, there has to be one of them who's converted. So I guess my go-getting spirit comes from that, because I always ensure that in the many doors that I knock on, there has to be one that kind of opens. So it really is a Salvation Army mentality that you are not done until there's that one door, or that one soul rather, that you saved from the lessons and I guess the skills that they teach us, or they taught us at the time.
Also, like at the time when you were in high school, now I believe that this happened when you were in high school, if I'm not mistaken, you had actually, you'd wanted to play the piano, but you were blocked off access from it. I would love if you share that story with the audience. Also, again, to set the context that although by now, obviously, South Africa is in its new democracy, everybody's talking about, oh, it's the Rainbow Nation. You know, from the outside in, it seems as though everything is going well in South Africa. But there was still quite a lot of divides, especially economically, and especially for Black people in South Africa. So talk to us about what happened around this piano story. It really is an analogy for what was going on in South Africa still at that time.
The whole story of the piano, so I was in high school, right? And then in high school, there's always assembly time. So during assembly, there was this grand piano, this grand Yamaha piano, and then the music teacher would always be playing this piano. So just because I resonated so strongly with music, I would always just be fixated on her and what she's doing on the piano. And this one time, I just went past the music department. I just wanted to just touch the piano, right? I mean, it was this is the piano I wanted to touch, actually, which was at a smaller scale. And the teacher at the time, I remember responding to me very harshly and then just saying to me that I cannot touch the piano because I cannot afford it. And I just remember how those words really stuck with me, and it made me so aware the divide really, and how I was really on the lower side of I would say the food chain, because she was right. I could not afford the piano, but remembering how that made me feel curated this sort of like trauma. And for the longest time, I did not want to play that instrument. But it is also something that fueled me into not wanting another Black child to feel as though they cannot play an instrument, they cannot access music because of where they come from. So that was also to give context. This is a school that I had to travel each and every day at 5:30 to ensure that I make it to this assembly. So it was a great education, but it this incident made me aware of the fact that I am not as equal as the rest.
Sure, that is so powerful. And it even just makes us always think that even when there's great change and awesome things going on, there are still a lot of things in society that generally have to be ironed out. So thank you so much for just sharing that. So now I'm curious, where did this idea about, okay, I want to start an orchestra, like how do you get to the place where you're like, you know what, I want to start an orchestra and I want 35 people in the orchestra. So where did this idea come for you? Like, where did it drop in your spirit?
Again, being the overly ambitious young girl I was when I was 12 years old and wanting to join this fully male brass band, I had this idea after having gone to various choir competitions, right, where these young people from various schools would be given prescribed music. So this was like from your Petrucci's, your Mendelssohn, your Mozart, and they would actually compete at national, regional, and local level. So after just hearing them sing, I had this idea of imagining them at a bigger space, such as Sydney Opera House, right? So I then got a few of them together, and then I was like, let's actually meet on Saturday. And then we met on Saturday. I had some music scores printed, and it was really just this jam session because I was just trying to gauge where their voices are, right? So I was like, you know what, you guys sound amazing. Is this something that you would want to do? They were like, yeah. I think they also loved the community that I had fostered for them, because it was like, yeah, now we can meet on Saturdays and actually do what we like doing. And then I was like, okay, let's actually meet every Saturday. So the next Saturday came and I had this imagination, and in my ear, I heard instruments, right, as they were singing. And I reached out to my friends in the brass band of the Salvation Army, asking them if they would want to join us the next rehearsal. They came through, and again, jamming, a trial and error. It sounded beautiful with just brass instruments. And then I was like, I imagined a softer tone. So I imagined strings. I imagine your violins and your cellos. So I spoke to the guys. I was like, hey guys, do you guys know of anyone who plays these instruments, or some of your friends, whatever? And they were like, yeah, definitely. We will definitely reach out to some of our friends. I think this is something that they would love to do. Again, young people just being about wanting to be in the same space where they can create music. So I was like, okay, cool. Let's meet the following Saturday. The following Saturday came. And then, I mean, as these instrumentalists were taking out their instruments from their music cases, I realized that, okay, now this is 19 people who have their instruments out, and then there's also a 16-member choir on my left. Who's going to conduct this, right? And then I was like, shucks, Ofentse. And most of the time, when you come up with questions, you are generally the answer to it. And I had to use my muscle memory, having seen how the conductors, or the bandmasters rather, in the church conduct. And then after that rehearsal, I was like, shucks, I need to now learn how to really do this properly, because otherwise it would be a disservice to these musicians who are looking to me as a leader to really know what I'm doing, to not know what I'm doing. So that's where the whole orchestra and choir idea came from. It was so organic that I am not even joking when I say that it was not part of the plan.
So first of all, when it comes to conducting, I feel as though the little that I know about playing a musical instrument, I had a short stint. It was fantastic, but it was short. I don't think I had the discipline to be able to continue all the time.
Yeah.
So when I think of instruments and stuff, I know for me, piano was quite a lot to learn. It was enjoyable, but it was quite a lot to learn. And I know, like, for instance, like the violin and so forth is really tough to learn. So there's that aspect of it. But now you as a conductor, you've got to be able to hear and understand everything that is happening, all the different instruments, all the different sections. How do you even train yourself to be able to do that? And also, did you ever get any kind of mentorship around it, because you fell into conducting basically?
Yeah. So even with the having fallen into conducting, I knew that it is such an elite art form. I knew that I had to get help. I knew that I needed to get someone who knew more than me to actually assist me and hold my hand. So I reached out to Herman Gruten, who is at the time was the conductor of the University of Pretoria Philharmonic Orchestra, and he also has like this illustrious conducting career from Europe and all that. So he came to South Africa with his wife to sort of like give back. So he's quite an important name, right? And he doesn't just conduct or teach or mentor anyone. So I reached out to him, and he wanted to meet me, and he met me, and he was okay. Tell me what your story is, and I told him who I am and what my story is and what my hope for Africa is in terms of conducting. Now seeing what the power of that really could do, right? And then he essentially taught me everything that he knows. So he taught me how to read a score, how to analyze a score, and also how to develop an ear for music. So in conducting, it is the process is more important than the product. So you can literally go months just for a show that will be like less than 2 hours. So it's the same principle that I would say, if I had to put it in context, that Beyonce uses, where she took 4 months for dance rehearsals, 4 months for band rehearsals, for a 2-hour show, and that was Coachella and Beachella. So it's similar to conducting, where you have to get to a point that where you are absolutely comfortable with the score and the music, and you have to know each and every running note that all of the instruments are playing, so that during rehearsals you can actually catch that the flute sounds a little bit flat, or they're not playing the running notes as they are written, or they are not attacking the notes as they are written. So that those are some of the things that I had to learn from Herman. And mind you, Herman style of teaching, he did not look at me as a girl, right? So we went to like really difficult pieces that I'm just like, yo, these are the new type of musicians, or music rather, or the repertoires that have destroyed a lot of careers, where you have to have a lot of grit, really, like to go for your 1812 Tchaikovsky's overture and all of those things. So it was important for me to have a mentor who knew more than me, and I guess also dealt with a lot of the things that I believe protected from dealing with, right? So I have a mentor who has like a lot of experience in the space of music, but also he's been through a lot of stuff, so he knew how to teach me to not make a lot of mistakes.
And now, when you talk about having a mentor who is able to protect you and to teach you from not making mistakes and so forth, I think that one of the things that one of the questions I have around even having a mentor like him who was globally renowned. Obviously, he's white, and the classical theater world, the classical music world is predominantly white people. You don't really find many Black people or African people within it. Obviously, that's changing. So having him as the person who when it came to dropping his name, did that help at all? Because, we always use the tools that we have, especially in that world that would perhaps not open the door to a young person who is Black, who is African. Did that mentorship also help in that way?
Absolutely, it did, because in the early stages, right, there were a lot of people that I reached out to who it's either they left my messages unread online or they just did not respond, or some of them just were like, we're not available to teach you because of various things. So when Herman took me in, again, like I said, he does not just teach anyone. So it was a big deal that, okay, why is he teaching this young Black girl who, mind you, I don't have any musical experience in terms of going to an institution. Like, I don't have a music degree. So it was also a hang on with she type of thing. So from the get-go, it was always a who is she. But because of Herman and the power that his name possesses, it has really allowed me to be in spaces where people don't even have to see me pick up my baton. They just know that, okay, you are Herman Gruten's mentee and student, so it means that you are really good. Like, we don't even have to ask you a lot of things. So that has allowed me a lot of access in spaces that I did not even dream I could really be a part of. So it was really important to have him also be able to answer some questions, because sometimes he would tell me that people would call him and ask if he really is my mentor, because I mentioned his name interview, so they really just trying to check for me and vet that I'm legit, and which is kind of odd, right? Because I'm just like, why would people do that? But I also understand because of how elite the classical music space is, not just anyone can make it through. So I kind of understand why people were checking for me and making sure that my story really holds ground.
And, just another aspect, moving forward on your journey, one of the things about you, again, we keep saying about you just being, your life is like having an audacity of faith. That's the way that I kind of summarize it. And you had this wonderful idea, which you actually executed, of having a show at one of the bigger theaters in Johannesburg in South Africa. I would love for you to share the story and just the lessons that you learned, because I feel that it resonates so much with the creative industry in terms of learning certain lessons, but it's also life lessons that we can learn across the board.
So I had my first big show in 2019, right? And then again, I wanted to showcase this orchestra, this all-Black orchestra, and this phenomenal choir, right? Anchored Sound, and I wanted to showcase them in this theater, the Mandela Theater, in Johannesburg. And when you get that first yes, after knocking on so many doors and getting a lot of no's, you kind of cling to it. So I believe that at the time I was so tethered to the product. I was like, I need to make sure that this show is top notch and all that. And then I did not ensure that in terms of the admin, I can really be certain that even before we go on stage, all of those things are taken care of. And I guess being really trusting in the space that not a lot of people give us opportunities, or not a lot of people are like, I'll actually fund that. Is that all you need? So I got that from the set sponsor. And I mean, after putting on the show and things were beautiful, it was great. And again, having this team of musicians who looked to me and was like, wow, you did it. You actually gave us the platform to be in a space that we've never been in. For me, it made me feel like, wow, I did something. But then after the show, then the set sponsor was nowhere to be found. So obviously with that, now you're having service providers and musicians looking for their money, as they should, right? Because I mean, they were talking to me. They were not talking to the sponsor. And I'm I'm the person who sold the dream to them. So it left a huge dent in a lot of people who really believed in me, I would say. For them, it was really more than just a booking. They believed that Ofentse is going to make our dreams to perform in these platforms where we don't really get this access. So it was really disheartening and heartbreaking to be disappointed by someone who gave me the first yes, and I hang on to that. So the lesson in that, I guess, was to ensure, which is something that we don't really get or are not privy to in the music space or the creative space, is that we don't know the economics of the art, right? All we know really is creating and performing at the highest level. So I learned that, hang on, before you even go into the theater space or whatever it is, you need to make sure that all things like the ground, everything on the ground is covered. So that's the one thing that I learned, to just not be so trusting.
Yeah, that's so true. Unfortunately, we live in the world that we do, and I just keep on thinking about the fact, in general, when people have debts, it's very taxing. But I can't even, pardon me, imagine being you were like maybe 26, 27 at that time, and carrying this debt and having people call you, and you're kind of out there alone, and you're very petite. If people see your pictures, you're like pretty tiny. So
quite small.
You're pretty small. So I just like, for you, how did that even affect you from mentally? Because that must have been a lot. That must have been so taxing. And how did you manage to get yourself out of that situation mentally so that you can move on with your career?
I mean, for me, it was not just the show, right? Because a few months prior to that, I think really 2 months before that, I had lost my mother, right, in a very sad way, and it was really untimely. So to have the show go sideways, it made me feel as though I had failed, right? And I had internalized it. And then I was just like, shucks, this is the one thing I felt as though should be a thank you to my mother for all the sacrifices that she made, and also allowing me to be a creative, especially in the time where most parents would be pushing their kids to do accounting, to do IT. She was very supportive of me being in the creative space, like to the fact that she would be the one who would be like, okay, what do you need for rehearsals? Are people, is everyone who needs to be there, do they have enough money for taxi? And then she would literally make provision for all the people who need to come to rehearsals to actually have taxi fare and all that. So it for me, it was more than just the sponsor letting me down, and obviously people calling me, and obviously people will call you names and this and the other. So it took a huge dent, like it made a huge dent on my mental, and I think I would say emotional health for the longest time. I didn't want to come back to music, to be quite honest, and I had parked this entire dream so far away, and I was like, let me just go back to corporate and then just pursue this architecture profession, because I have the degree and all that. That's what I went to school for, and I really wanted to stay low for the longest time. So it's something that I'm still working on, because the idea of feeling like you're not good enough, or even the fear of failing, even when things are going right, I have that. I always have one eye up when things are actually going okay, and I'm just like, who am I? Are we not repeating the same thing that happened at the echoes of time? So it's something that I'm working on, because it really made me feel like I can never be good enough. Even when people want to invest in the things that I do, I always am like, but really, why me? So again, it's a bit of the spirit of self-sabotage that I'm working. I constantly have to work through because of that incident.
Well, Ofentse, thank you very much for just being so candid and open and vulnerable and sharing that. I think that a lot of people will be touched, whether they're in the creative industry or at any stage in their life, just for you being honest. Because I think that the feelings that you have were and still are very real. And they're feelings that a lot of us have, but we can't always put it into words the way that you have. And now, I wanted to shift more into the ecosystem of classical music and the world of theater and what helps make it thrive. I heard you in another interview, you spoke about how in Europe, when it came to theater, it was really such a part of people's communities, versus in Africa, it's not so much a thing.
So the statement that I often often make is that, in Europe, the entire family goes to support theatre. So from Thursday to Sunday, you'll find that 5-member family will get into their car and go consume theatre productions, and that's why you have these long-standing productions such as the likes of Don Giovanni, La Traviata, Le Nozze di Figaro, Carmen, Othello, being projects or projects really that constantly come every season, because of the fact that people who actually consume the art understand that them supporting it fuels back into the country's economy, which now gives back to the art economy. So I would say that, unfortunately, in SA, we are more fixated in supporting the gig culture of things. So we don't understand that with theatre, if a ticket is, say, 800 rand, because that would be the equivalent of an international theatre play, right? You find a lot of people who would not want to pay that money, because for them it's like, that's a lot of money for me to put into something that I'm only going to see once. But without understanding that, hang on, this is actually something that's going to allow this play to continuously return in this theatre. So that's the unlearning that has to happen with a lot of people, where they don't understand that theatre has this economy to it that actually assist in the greater running of the country. So that's what I'm also trying to instill, especially in my peers, because my peers don't understand theatre, right? That's why it has been so important for me to drive this narrative that theatre is cool. Like, we can be in theatre and do an electro house concert. We can be in theatre and do like an amapiano or pop or urban type of repertoire, and then it's still cool. So that's I would say, part of my vocation as well, to allow people to understand the importance of really being fully vested in theatre and knowing which shows are playing where and why it is important for us to go watch them.
No, I think, we globally, especially in the last, I'd say 2 years, what has been happening in general is that everybody's been talking about the fact that representation matters. But when you look at let me say, if we look at music as a whole, obviously African music has exploded globally, and, just saluting all of the artists, the talent, the managers, everybody that is really just putting Africa on the map in that way. It's incredible. But so music, like popular culture music, has really exploded globally. So we never have a situation where people are like, oh, we need to see more Black people in general around the world making music, or oh, we need to see more Black or African people. We're at that stage now where it's there. But in the classical musical world, it's not so much the case where we see it so much. It's not really in our faces. I'd say even other classical arts, when you look at like ballet and so forth, we still are celebrating, like in the classical music space, we're celebrating Ofentse. We're like, oh, she's Black, she's young, she's female, she owns an orchestra, and she, and she conducts, with ballerinas and so forth. We also are still celebrating, like, oh, there's this Black ballerina and so forth. We have a way to go where that's concerned. My question is, when it comes to the world, the classical music world, I think one of the things that's a barrier for somebody who's kind of on the outside looking in is that whenever I hear anything about classical music, it's always names, and they're awesome names. It's like people like Beethoven and all of that. Like, those are the people that we hear. Nothing wrong with that at all. But we haven't seen or heard, or we're not hearing enough in public about African, works in that space. So have you come across any African works that that really inspired you along, that really spoke about African narratives? Because the classical theatre world, the classical music world, is really about storytelling. So have you come across any of this at all?
Yeah, I mean, when I really decided to be full throttle with this conducting thing, right? I was like, if I'm really going to do this, then it has to be from the point of view of wanting to celebrate Africa and the arts. So I was very intentional that I want to get into looking at works that are either of African descent or fully African. So the first work that I was really crazy about was Professor Mzilikazi Khumalo's Ushaka Gasenza Kona, which is an entire opera that speaks about the life of Shaka Zulu. So from his childhood to his teenage years to when he became, this great king, right? But also with the themes surrounding that, and then to the very end, his death. And then while I was looking at that music, I was like, hang on, but the style of how this is written is in the same style as if I were to be watching Mozart's Requiem, right? And then I was like, if anything, I would want to sort of like bring forth the idea that Africa actually has the potential, right? It has the ability to write operas, to write oratorios. So when I came into contact with Mzilikazi Khumalo's work, I wanted to know more works and more creatives and more arrangers, not just in South Africa, but in the entire diaspora. So I became also interested in the language that is used when we write operas. Obviously, the works that I speak of is in isiZulu, so I became more interested in what other works exist that is written maybe about Muramansa, right? What other works are written about, or in Kiswahili or in a Senegalese language. So I became more interested in what really is out there in Africa. And I was like, if we don't have arrangers, or if we don't have people who understand the dynamics really, and I would say the science of orchestration, whatever, I wanted to be the barrier to bring that forth. So that has been really my calling for increasingly for the past few months, to really be flat-footed and intentional about having it be fully African. So essentially speaking Africa.
I love that. And even when I think about that, I just love that you really have such intent about the role and the legacy that you want to be able to leave, and the things that you want to do and achieve in terms of putting Africa front and center in the classical music world. I'm also very curious about the instruments, right? Because I guess one of the reasons why for the longest time we've not seen many Black people, African people and so forth involved in orchestras, it's always a cost thing. I mean, owning an instrument, it's always like a cost factor. But it's not such a bad thing when you consider the fact that in Africa, as you know, we're very musical kind of people. So an instrument is instruments are all around us. And we also have our our own African instruments. Do these ever get used in any of the orchestras that you conduct at all? I mean, I know that you can't answer for big places like the Sydney Opera House and so forth, but do you think that there's a space in that where they will be like, okay, to include like the African kora or the talking drums or that kind of thing? Like, how does that all work? What are your thoughts around that and any experience that you've had?
Actually, interesting enough, the recent show that I did about a couple of weeks back, I had this grand idea, right? So I got this brief, right, from this client who was like, Ofentse, imagine if Beyonce was to come to you and say that she wants to do Coachella in Africa. How would you go about it? And then I was like, shucks, I mean, that's a mouthful. How would I go about an African Coachella? So I was like, obviously, I would look at how I would juxtapose the instruments, right, in the orchestra and put African instruments, because otherwise, why are you coming to Africa, right? So I had 3 kora players who are originally from Gambia as well as Senegal, right? I had Jalikeba Soso, I had Sifo Kanute, I had Mamadou Drame manning the kora front of the instruments, right? And then I had this entire West African percussion section of your ndundun drums, your saba drums, your tunkunes. So I had this entire representation, right, of on the left there was this classically trained orchestra that knew how to read music. They've been playing your Beethoven, your Mozart, your Tchaikovskys, your Sibelius. And then I have these African instrumentalists who don't know how to read music, but they understand rhythm. They also understand the spirit really of Africa when it comes to music. So the challenge, I would say, was how do I bring the two worlds together? So most of the time, I had to relate to these musicians and show them how I conduct so that they know which note they land on, where to start, where to end. And because of that, I saw the dynamic power really of innovation when it comes to orchestras, because that's something that has never been seen, right? I've seen, obviously now with the exploration of Africa and the arts and with the likes of Black Panther, how the orchestrator for the music looked at how he would include 6 talking drums, right? And that created such a special effect, right? Like it was like, shucks, I'm hearing this very classical orchestra, and even in their phrasing and their approach and their playing, very classical, but then there's these 6 talking drums. So that also is something that highlighted or opened my eyes to the possibility of what is possible. So I would say from a conducting point of view, it is possible, but we also need conductors and arrangers who are as daring as the likes of myself and, said arranger for the first Black Panther Ludwig. So that really is what it takes.
Oh, I really love everything about this. I'm just really, I actually have a strong sense that very soon the world is really going to be celebrating you, because you're definitely one of the people just spearheading so many things, and you're so young still. Just in closing, I was trying to do some research to kind of find out about the business and the amount of revenue that can be generated within the classical music sector. We always hear about, more popular music and how much money can be made in movies and so forth. And so the latest that I was able to find was that in North America, the revenue for classical music revenue holistically was $145.9 million. In Europe, $135.8 million. In Asia, $79.2 million. In Latin America, $19.7 million. And then the rest of the world, $3.3 million. Now, it says a lot of things. First of all, these numbers sound great, but we know that even in America, the actual music that's outside of classical music, one artist is making this revenue. So we already know that the numbers already show that there's a small pie when it comes to the classical music. But now when I see North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Latin America, rest of the world, 3.3, that means Africa falls under the rest of the world with everybody else, that has not been mentioned.
In the ocean.
That's a small amount,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in order to grow the creative sectors across the board, one of the things that has become really important is firstly being able to generate audiences, which I think that having somebody like you is awesome. It generates audiences and people who are young like you to be interested. And second of all, also getting investment from the private sector, and then third of all, being able to get the government to support. So let's imagine that, Ofentse Pitse, you are the ambassador for classical music in Africa, and you have this opportunity to speak to, to somebody who is going to be able to make a difference. What would your policy be?
I mean, the policy I think it would be, before it becomes a policy, I think it would become, I would start with the state of mind, right? So I look at the likes of Laduma Ngokolo, who is the founder and the designer for Makosa, right? I look at also Nelson Makamo, and I look at how their brands or their expression is rooted in Africanism, right? And Africanism also being at the forefront of where they come from. And I look at how the way in which they think allows them to move in the ways that they move. So when you speak Africa, right, you have the sense of being and knowing what the intention is, or knowing how to move. So I would say that is the first thing that has to happen. And I say that because for me, in the beginning, I thought that Africa was Miriam Makeba's Pata Pata, right? And then only to find out that, shucks, there's actually other musicians. There's the likes of Alifaka Touré, there's the likes of Tony Allens, there's the likes of Kine Lam, there's your Omo Sangeres. There's so much about Africa, and I needed to know what it is really I am speaking about. So that understanding fueled my passion to really want to be at the forefront, or part of the decision makers, or the change makers rather, who are putting Africa on its putting Africa on its rightful throne. And so the policy again that I would, moving this statement further, is that I would include like-minded people who understand the importance really of being about Africa. And you can only really understand what being about Africa is about when you understand, or when you're at a point of understanding what being about yourself is. So self-awareness is also very, very important. I'm a Tswana girl, right? But I have such a huge fascination in the language that they speak in Guinea-Bissau, for example, right? So I don't just hold Africa to just the small town that I'm from, or the small place that I'm from. So understanding and being open open really to who else is there in the world, or in Africa rather. It fosters or it creates opportunity for collaboration. And because collaboration is possible and the importance of collaboration allows us then to put in place these policies that allow us to sort of like contribute to the rise of the Black economy, one, and also contribute to the rise of the artistic economy, which I think that's something to be explored.
So, Ofentse, just in closing, I have two additional questions that I wanted to ask you. So the first thing is around, during COVID, we really saw the digitization of music really going into the next level. I think it's safe to say that COVID put African music in such a place that everybody didn't know what they were doing, but online music, through what was going on TikTok, the challenges, the dancing, all of that, and African music being the backdrop and the soundtrack of that, it really like rocketed forward what we're seeing now with classical music, right? And the whole digitization of it. I know you've spoken a lot about performances and all of that stuff. For you, are you looking at putting out, having any original works putting out, and what are your thoughts around the digitization of classical music in order to be able to bring more people into it?
I mean, especially with COVID, it had two ripple effects, right? So the first one was it actually caused a stint in the classical music space where a lot of classical music, symphony orchestras, let me say, it's either they closed down or their opera houses had to close down because obviously cost and maintenance and all that. And then we saw such other orchestras that looked at that as an opportunity, and then we were looking at or seeing digital symphonies and digital, orchestras forming, with the likes of one being rather the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. So innovation really had a lot to play in terms of vision casting for where the orchestra really is going into, where people don't have to experience music in a physical space. Now there's a metaverse that can be created, which can be similar to how a person would essentially be sitting in a theater space or in a theater chair and consuming the art, right? So that for me was a vision caster to show where essentially we are leading into in terms of music, especially the classical music space, where we are able now to look at the prospect of creating a metaverse where we can create a Sydney Opera House literally in the back of our houses or in our lounges because of what technology has shown us the possibility of. So my approach really, I would say, is in the same way as in pop and urban music, they treat music like such a phenomenal experience. So even in how you experience the sound from the sonic point of view, it's so intentional, right? You have different plugins or different engineering softwares that allow you to feel as though you are in there with the artist. So that is one of the things that I would like to introduce in the music that I do, which is quite an urban approach, because in classical music, that is something that is experienced in the space that is being created. So it's only something that you experience in theater, but now you can actually take the theater with you anywhere you go. So you can plug in your headsets and experience what you would normally get when listening to the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra or whatever orchestra it is that you consume. So I would say that's really where I see us going, where we're creating various realities in terms of technology, sonically and otherwise.
And finally, Ofentse, everybody as an entrepreneur, somebody who's in tech, as a creative all around, and just as people, there are always landmarks in our lives where we're like, it may not seem like a lot to other people, but to us, it's kind of like, whew, I really needed that to just know that I'm still on the right track. Is there any moment in your life that has been like that, where something has happened that may seem so small to everybody else, but it was so big to you?
Sure, yes, actually. It's something that happened recently, and I felt like it spoke to the power of my relentless mind, right? And again, the power of the unspoken word, or things that are really spiritual. So I believe it was about 2.5 weeks ago, where I was on Instagram and I got a notification that Solange Knowles liked 2 of my posts on Instagram. One was both posts were of me conducting. And that for me, if anything, was an affirmation to say that there's a Solange Knowles who I look up to, right? And who's an amazing musician, storyteller, and all-round just creative genius, who is looking at Ofentse Pitse's content for whichever reason. So that affirmed me in my ways to say that, you know what, Ofentse, actually keep going. You know, all these dreams that you may think, this is big, this. I don't think someone would actually understand this kind of dream. So let me just sort of like tone it down. That for me was saying, listen, we are going full throttle with that, with the all of the dreams that you actually want to come to fruition. So yeah, that's something that I remember taking 5 screenshots at the same time of that, because it was really something special for me.
Ofentse Pitse, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Africa Whisperer. Honestly, you have given such insight into the classical music world, and you've given it from an African perspective. And as somebody who's, even though you're making great strides, you're also finding your own voice. So we just really are just so glad that you were able to join us in this episode, and looking forward to more awesome things from you. Thank you so much, Ofentse. You remind all of us that it's okay to dream. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Africa Whisperer. I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed having this conversation with my esteemed guest. Please, if you want to find out anything more about the podcast, go to theafricawhisperer.com, where you can find out about the team that helps put this production together, my amazing guests that we have each and every week, as well as send any feedback that you might have by emailing hello@theafricawhisperer.com. Also, remember to follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter as Lee Kasumba. Catch you next time. Thanks.